One of the things that I would stress right off the top is that I think it's really important that people do have a lawyer. And in fact, if people come to me and they don't have a lawyer, that's usually my first stop with them is, let's find you a lawyer. And for those people who say, well, we don't have really any conflict and I think we can do this, ourselves. I would caution that even though that may be the case, there are things in the future that could come back to sort of haunt you if you didn't have lawyers helping you sort of ink whatever deal it is that you've come up with and agreed to.
Hello and welcome to the Divorce Circle. I'm Sabeena Bubber, your host, and today we welcome Jill McLennan, who is a veteran family law paralegal and divorce coach with over 15 years' experience working in family law matters, including high conflict and high net worth matters. She currently works at Joyce Law, a North Vancouver-based litigation firm which practices, among other things, family and insurance law. Joyce Law also serves the Portuguese-speaking community as they have 2 Portuguese-speaking lawyers in BC, as well as a Portuguese-speaking articling student. Lastly, Jill is also the lead singer of Vancouver's Shag the Band, which she notes is her life beyond divorce and is a testament to the fact that after a family breakdown, you too can rebuild yourself into the person you want to be. Jill and her husband, David Joyce, who is a 27-year call lawyer, together run North Vancouver's Joyce Law. Welcome, Jill.
Hi, Sabeena. Thanks for having me.
So, Jill, tell us, what is a divorce coach? What exactly does that mean?
So, divorce coaches come in a few different stripes, and I would say that a majority of them come from almost a clinical counseling sort of an angle, and they would help with things like emotional regulation and, say, communication skills with your 2BX, particularly if it's really high conflict, or with how to talk to your children about divorce. They might also help with just being that download person that people really need when they're going through a divorce, which is something that I always recommend in any event, is that you should have a counselor because you don't want to wear out your friends and family. So that type of a divorce coach can really help with that angle as well. And then interpersonal relationships and future planning. Who am I going to be when this divorce is done and over? And what am I looking forward to in the future? I come from more of a litigation angle. So my approach is to help people understand the procedure and the process that they're going through without giving legal advice. So, and one of the things that I would stress right off the top is that I think it's really important that people do have a lawyer. And in fact, if people come to me and they don't have a lawyer, that's usually my first stop with them is, let's find you a lawyer. And for those people who say, well, we don't have really any conflict and I think we can do this, ourselves. I would caution that even though that may be the case, there are things in the future that could come back to sort of haunt you if you didn't have lawyers helping you sort of ink whatever deal it is that you've come up with and agreed to. So I think it's really important to find yourself a lawyer. And then I become an added extra piece. And I tend to have clients who are a little bit more high conflict. There's a little bit more court involved, a little bit more litigation. And what I help them with is understand that process and that journey. And just a really small example would be, what's the difference between a hearing and a trial? A lot of people will get into court and they'll have this big hearing and they'll be like, well, is that not it? And, and it's not often. So there's different stops along your journey, and I help them map it all out as to where they're going. And the purpose of that is most lawyers cost money, a fair amount of money. There is legal aid to be had. There is sometimes pro bono lawyers, but a lot of times lawyers for family law, if you're lucky, you're going to start out at $300 an hour. Maybe, you're going to be $400, $500. And, if you're in a really high net worth file, you might wind up, having lawyers that are $800, $900, $1,000 an hour. So my role is to help explain non-legal advice parts to you that you don't want to be paying $800 an hour to a lawyer to explain to you. So other things I can help people with are things like helping them reduce their legal fees, their overall legal fees, by approaching their litigation from a more mindful approach. And we can, I can give you some concrete examples of that going forward. But I can also help with communication skills, again, also with your 2BX. So one thing I like to say to people is consider everything that you say and do will be used against you in a court of law. So everything that you write down is probably going to wind up in an affidavit in front of a judge, if it's a high conflict matter. It's going to wind up in front of a judge, and a judge is going to be looking at it and making decisions, possibly based on communications that you've had back and forth. So I help people with being brief and being concise and to the point. And, and sometimes it's not satisfactory to them to, maybe there's no resolution in it, but I help them understand why they don't need more, and they don't need to get into the vicious cycle of going, emails flying back and forth between parties. And I can help with, how to talk to your kids about divorce. A lot of people say kids are resilient. And I really dislike that saying a lot, because it makes it sound like the whole thing's just going to bounce off of them. And it doesn't.
It's not.
It absolutely does not bounce off of them. They all deal with it and compartmentalize things in different ways. And again, going back to that kind of counseling concept, I will always say to people, get counseling, get your children counseling, right? It's a really important part of the whole piece of the divorce circle, as you would say. And but there are, ways to speak with your kids at home about the process, and the biggest piece of advice is you don't speak to them about the litigation, except for just on very high levels. Mommy and daddy are getting some people to help us sort these things out, right? That kind of a thing.
Well, why are you upset? Well, that's between me and dad and all the people in our corner, and it's an adult problem, and it's not something that concerns you because it's your dad, and I don't want to say anything that might upset you.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So those are sort of the broad stroke brushes of things that I help with. There's, just even other things, helping people understand why their lawyer is asking them for this voluminous amount of documentation, how to get it in order, how to present it to your lawyer so that they're getting it in a cohesive fashion, and that you're not just dumping it on them for them to deal with, because they're going to charge you or they'll charge out their staff to deal with it, right? To manage it, to organize it. So, if you're really concerned about your legal bills, you want to make sure that you're communicating and giving your lawyer documents in the most cohesive and organized, properly labeled fashion that you can give to them. So I help teach people how to manage their own files as well.
I've had some people come to me and say, I don't even understand what some of these documents are, let alone where to find them. So are you able to help people with finding those documents and how to track them down? Yeah, exactly. I mean, some people will, an example would be somebody who has a business that isn't maybe a very sophisticated business. And so they're being asked for things that maybe a more traditional business might have, like financial statements or things like that. So, for somebody who's maybe just running a really small business that hasn't really kept books in a proper way, I can help organize whatever it is that they have and then help present it in a fashion to their lawyer with a narrative explaining why they don't have perhaps the documents that are being requested of them. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your background. How did you get here? What got you to being a divorce coach?
So I had what I would say is probably one of the world's worst divorces as well. And and it was extremely high conflict. There was conflict over, money. There was extreme conflict over the children. And at some point, I wound up without representation. I didn't have any money, and I had to figure it out myself. And I had to figure out how to navigate the courts and understand the processes that you need to go through to get in front of a judge, how to conduct a trial. Like it's, and nobody wants to do it. It's really something you don't want to do. And after that, at one point I had a lawyer who gave me probably the best advice I'd ever had. He said, there's nothing more important than your education. And he meant that from, an overview of, I had young children at the time. How are you going to, move forward with your children? And so I took that advice and I went back to school and I got my paralegal diploma. And I worked for a couple of years in corporate and securities, which really gave me an amount of financial literacy when I'm looking at sort of more complex corporate structures and understanding financial statements, understanding share structures, understanding how maybe one company owns another, that kind of a thing. And then from there, I actually moved into family law because it was something that I already sort of had a background in and understood. And that very first job that I had worked on some very, very significant high net worth files and very, very high conflict files. So I really got quite a good experience and education at that very first job that I had for, I think, about 5 years. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's incredible that you decided to go back to school, and that worked out really well for you and the kids as well, I imagine, taking that extra step.
Well, yeah, you have your own sense of, security, especially, for a lot of women. A lot of women, we tend to do the same thing, which is we get an education early on, we wind up getting married, we stay at home with the kids, we lose our experience out in the world. We lose our contacts out in the world that you would normally have when you're building up a career. And then you find yourself in a situation where you're getting divorced and you're thinking, how do I reinvent myself? What do I do?
So what should people think about before separating? And are there things that they can do to save themselves some money?
So I would say that some of the things, first of all, don't collect $200, don't pass go, change all your passwords. That's like the number one thing to do. Anything and everything that you can possibly think of that might be password protected somewhere, PIN protected, your bank accounts, your email accounts, of course, your phone, everything, change everything. And if possible, you may want to consider even setting up a new email account. That's one thing to consider doing, one that is you probably are just going to use between you and your lawyer and your divorce circle people. And another thing you should try to do if you can is try to collect as much financial documentation as you can. Because sometimes it's really hard to get your hands on these things afterwards. We live in a bit more of a digital age from when I was separating, but sometimes there still are things that are. Some people still get physical statements to the house for maybe investment accounts and things like that. So, as much information as you can possibly get, financial wise, is very good as well. A few of the other things that you can do, if you haven't separated yet, but you're considering it, is getting your hands on things like passports and making sure that you have any of those important kind of documents. Just depending on your situation, it may be really hard to have to go get them afterwards once a separation has actually occurred. Sometimes people fight over who gets to hold the kids' passports, so that's something to think about. Other things, you may even want to going back to the security issue, you may even want to consider getting a new phone. I've known of situations where people have literally installed spyware on a person's phone so it just depends on your situation. And if you even think it might happen, you probably should go get a new phone. I always try to tell people, prepare for war, but hope for peace,
Mhm.
right? So strive for peace all you possibly can, but prepare for war because you just don't know. People get funny when money gets involved or you're dealing with children issues that can get really emotional. So the other thing that you can do is start talking to lawyers. You don't have to wait to be separated before you can talk to a lawyer. And get to know what your rights are, understand, you can ask some questions about how you can take next steps to approach that separation as well. And it doesn't mean that you're going to get divorced just to talk to a lawyer, right? So I think that that's an important thing to do as well.
I think that information gathering of talking to a lawyer can sometimes make you decide, actually, it's not worth it. I'm going to go back in and try to make the relationship work. And that's where maybe, going into counseling with a couples therapist to see if you can give it a shot. There's different things that meeting with the lawyer can bring up with you. And sometimes it can mean I've got to take some action or I might be in some trouble if I don't start doing something.
Yeah.
Once someone this is a big one. And a big reason why I wanted to have you here today was because as a divorce coach, you can save people a lot of money on their legal fees. And can you explain to me how divorce coach can help someone save money on their legal fees?
So a great example, I have this, and one of my really most important things is, so first I'm going to talk about how lawyers bill. And lawyers bill typically in 6-minute increments. So this is a typical retainer situation. Sometimes you might be able to find a lawyer that is going to do a flat fee because it seems like you're both able to come to an agreement about something, and maybe they're just going to do a separation agreement for you. But if you're getting into a litigation situation, lawyers are typically going to bill in 6-minute increments, and then they break that up over the hour as a 0.1, a 0.2, a 0.3, and so forth until you get a 1.0 being a 1 hour. So let's just say I brought some math with me today.
Okay.
So let's just say that you have a conservatively charging lawyer at $400 an hour.
Okay.
So you're going to get your bill and you're going to look at it and it's going to have the date and it's going to have a narrative as to what they did. And then next to it is going to be that 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. It's going to say how much time they charged you for it. So if it's a 0.1 and you have a $400 an hour lawyer, you've just spent $40. If it's a 0.2, it's $80 and so forth all the way up to a 1.0, which is $400. So one of the ways I like to try to coach people on is their communications with their lawyer. And we all want to be heard. We all want our lawyer to know our story inside and out. Because we want the judge ultimately to know us and know our story and know everything that ever happened to us. And people will tend to get into this just emailing their lawyer with every thought that comes into their head. So they send one email and they send another email and they send another email and send another email. And then maybe their 2BX sent them something that, called them a nasty name and they want to forward that to their lawyer because they want their lawyer to know about it. And so this can get really expensive. And so what I try to do is help people journal, right? So if it's a non-urgent issue, if it's something that's happened, again, a great example would be you have children and we know they grow so fast, right? And so you've got to buy new clothes for your kids. You buy them a bunch of new clothes, you send them back to the other parent's place, and they come back in clothes that are 2 sizes too small for them. And you want to email your lawyer, and because you're mad about this, and you want them to resolve it somehow. Well, even if it's an email that takes them 1 minute to read, they're going to charge you the full 6 minutes on that email. So imagine you go through a week or a couple of weeks and you send them one email that takes them 1 minute to read. The next day, it's another email that takes them only a minute to read, and so forth until you've sent them 6 emails that took them 6 minutes each to read, or 10 emails that take them each a minute to read. The point being is that if you journal it all, and now it takes them a half an hour to get through your stuff, instead of having paid $400, you're paying them $240 if it only takes them, so long to read it, right? 36 minutes. So I'm not doing great in my math here, but you get the point.
I get the point.
You get the point is that don't send them a ton of emails, because even if it just takes them 1 minute to read, you're going to get charged 6. So you might as well send them enough content that is going to take them 6 minutes to read.
And also, I think from that perspective, it's also take a deep breath. And when you're journaling, by the time you actually get prepared to send that email, because it's accumulation of things over the week or whatever, some of those items have been resolved, are not as critical, are not legal issues. So you can save yourself money by having a coach who can help you to decipher the things that you actually need to talk to your lawyer about.
Yeah, because, if you get to the point where you're really getting upset about the clothes coming back that are 2 sizes too small, if your real goal is to have your lawyer deal with that as a legal issue, which they could if you really wanted it to, that could be a really expensive journey, right? What do you want? You want to go to court? You want to have a judge? I don't know. Or even to have your lawyer write a letter to the opposing counsel about it. You're looking at $700, $800, $1,000, right? Just go buy them new clothes. It's much cheaper in the end, right?
Yeah.
So, you've got to do that kind of math, right? It's the hard math. So, and on that note, to further your question about how to save them money, well, it's not necessarily saving them money. It's putting into perspective how much things will cost as you go along. So, for example, if you do have issues that need to be sorted out in a courtroom and before trial. So, the life of a file culminates with a trial theoretically at the end. Hopefully, most people tend to settle before then. But meanwhile, you can't wait that long. Trials right now for family law are probably booking out at least a couple years from now. Like even if you tried to get a 2-week family trial right now, it might be a couple years in the future, depending on what jurisdiction you're in. But you can't wait that long to figure out who has the kids when, right? You need to know those parenting arrangements. So you need to go to court sooner. So that process of getting that interim order that you need to hold you through till trial, it's going to cost a lot of money. And so, what I can do is say, well, are there other issues that you maybe want to address at the same time that you can ask your lawyer about? Because you don't want to be dealing with just one issue here and then go, oh, but I forgot about these things and we can't get an agreement out of it. I need to go back to court. And because the cost just becomes, it escalates. So I can help them identify issues that they may want to bring up with their lawyer to possibly add to those interim applications, but also getting an idea of what the realistic cost of that is probably going to look like in the end. What is your legal bill for an interim application going to look like at the end? And what is it going to look like if you go to trial? Like we can do some math together. We can sit down and do some math together about all of the costs that are going to go into, taking your matter to trial and what it's going to cost. And that helps people make decisions sometimes about what's more important to them, right? It's very stressful process.
Trial is at least $10,000 a day, if not more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the day. It has nothing to do with the prep work of the 2 years leading into it.
Exactly. And experts, if you need to get expert reports. So if you've got businesses that need valuations, valuation reports can be very, very expensive.
Which usually happens with cases that go to trial because it isn't two people that are salaried that are going to court. It's usually people that have businesses that are going to court.
Exactly. You've got a family business and you have to figure out, how are you going to divide it, which, sometimes you're not actually dividing the business. You're putting a monetary value on it and somebody's, going to get a payment out of it because the business needs to keep going, theoretically. But that, and as well, if you are in significant disagreement about your children, you may have to get expert reports on parenting arrangements. And those are called Section 211s, or sometimes you get a view of the child report if they're a little bit older. But if you've got young kids, and you can't come to an agreement, you might have to get one of these reports done, which is where usually a psychologist will come in and they do like a full evaluation of the family. It's extremely stressful. And they make recommendations to the court. That's the purpose of them, is to make recommendations to the court as to what should the parenting arrangements be. So those are very, very expensive as well. So all these costs, you have to really consider, all of your costs, and it will come into your decision making. It will play into your decision making.
But not all divorces have to be that expensive. So when we talk about go to a lawyer, you have your lawyer. When I went to my lawyer, yes, those emails killed me.
Yeah. Yeah.
My bills every month, I was like, but we didn't actually talk to each other. So what is this for?
Yeah.
It was crazy how much the cost would rack up in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
And we were not any closer to getting a resolution. There was no talking to the other side. It was just talking to each other. So I wish I had a divorce coach during that time period to help me navigate those conversations and what to properly address with the lawyer. But going back to the parenting piece, our lawyers sent us to a parenting coordinator who helped us to work out those parenting issues so that we didn't have to deal with court or anything like that. Yeah. And that parenting coordinator really, I found the process to be quite challenging, however effective. And I think challenging because we're sitting in the same room together trying to come to an agreement when we couldn't agree to begin with, which is why we're getting divorced. And he's like, we can't sort this parenting stuff out because we have to sort out stuff between us. And I'm like, we haven't sorted stuff for 27 years. It's not happening. And now we have to agree on the same things for our kids.
Yeah, exactly.
But we did save from going to court, and that report or that parenting coordinator was quite effective in helping us. So that is an option, is it?
Is
that usually the first option that's given before you go to court, or when is it that we?
Sometimes, it's every fact pattern's different. And sometimes what'll happen is people will wind up in court over issues, parenting arrangements. It could be, sometimes the thing that'll propel them into courts is the child's entering school and there's a fight over which school the child should go to, because now parents are living in two different, school districts, right? So things will tend to propel people into court over parenting issues. And then again, and I'll come back to your question, but that's where I'll sometimes go, if you're going to go in on that one issue, you should actually go in on a whole bunch of issues, right? But sometimes I think what I've seen happen is people will go in on one issue, they'll go in on another issue, they'll go on another issue. And the court or their lawyers will suggest, at one point, they'll say, you need a parenting coordinator because clearly you can't, do this yourself. I see parenting coordinators usually being a response more than they are the first step often, but they're a really good option to use. And if anything, because once you get your first couple of bills from them as well, you'll start to figure out how to agree on stuff really quickly.
Yeah, because the parenting coordinator is about as expensive as your lawyer.
They're very expensive. They, yes, exactly. So now that being said, unfortunately, there are some people who have kind of like a scorched earth policy, and they're just so high conflict that, there is nothing that you can do to get them to kind of come to any agreement. And absolutely, a parenting coordinator is a super valuable tool when you're in a situation like that, for sure.
In your experience, what are the biggest mistakes people make by not having a circle of people around them for their divorce? So just relying on their lawyer, and what can a divorce coach do to help them prevent these mistakes?
I think the mistakes come from not understanding process and procedure. So you need to be able to see the roads and the forks in the roads and the potential ways it could go. You need to be able to have an understanding of that. And then once you have an understanding of that, and by that I mean, I could explain to you that, your best case scenario is that you each get a lawyer, and you come to an agreement. One lawyer drafts the agreement. The other lawyer maybe makes a few suggestions and you change a few things. You sit down, you ink a deal, and you're done. And you never even see the inside of a courtroom. That's your absolute best case scenario, right? So that's one fork in the road. The other fork in the road is that you start an amount of litigation, and through that process, there's branches off of that road that happen. Oh, we've got to do a JCC first, and that is part of the process that I would explain to people.
I'm going to interrupt you there. What is a JCC?
Oh, yeah. So in family law, the first thing you actually do if you're getting divorced in the British Columbia Supreme Court, you're going to file a notice of family claim. And then the other person responds to you, and there may be a few other little papers that go back and forth, responses and counterclaims, these kind of things. But these are just your very initial documents that say, "Hi, I want a divorce," and the other person's responding saying, "Okay, party on, let's get divorced." And these are the things I'm claiming. But before you can do anything else in the court, you need to attend what's called a judicial case conference. And it's this informal conference with a judge, the parties and a judge, and you kind of see what you can come to an agreement on when you're, and you can kind of get a little bit of a flavor of the judge might be like, well, I might, think that you guys could maybe come to an agreement on this over here. They're not going to tell you what to do or how to do it, but you might get a little bit of a temperature of where it possibly could go should you continue with litigation. And sometimes people can come to some agreements there, and that's wonderful. So that's a JCC. And so that's one sort of fork in the litigation process. But then as you continue on, you could do these interim applications if you need something because you can't hold on till trial, which is sort of this other end of the road place that you might eventually go. But you can get off before that at so many places. So you can, you could come to an agreement partway through the process. You could, heaven forbid, reconcile. There's so many different things that could possibly happen. But once you can see, sort of the map of what it looks like and the possible routes that you could take or go on, I think that helps people make less mistakes, right? So when you can see it, then you can make better decisions about where you want to go and how you want to get there.
And who you want to have along the road with you. Your lawyer, your divorce coach, your therapist, your accountant, your financial advisor. The list of people continues. And even on your friends and family, who's going to be, you don't want to blab it to the world. And often divorce happens in quiet where we don't want to talk about it with everybody because it's so emotional. And sometimes there's some guilt and shame involved and people are quiet about it. So who are your people so that you don't have to suffer in silence?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think for me, I feel like that's the biggest thing that helps avoid pitfalls is that if you can understand what's in front of you, and your road trip options, not your legal options. That's for your lawyer to tell you. Yeah.
More the map.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what roles do financial literacy play in empowering your clients, and especially those who haven't been involved in the money decisions before?
Yeah, it's, I have worked on files, and I'll say that the typical, to your question, the typical situation is women who have been at home looking after the kids and who have had no involvement perhaps in the family business. So it's a black hole of information to them. They don't know. I've worked on many files where the client hasn't even ever been in charge of paying any bills, right? So they have no idea how much the mortgage costs. They have no idea what hydro costs. They're given a grocery allowance a month and for the kids and maybe a credit card to pay for, the kids' swimming lessons and things like that. So financial literacy is really, really important. So if you find yourself really not knowing, what is going on in your household income, and if you've got a family business, in the family business income, I would say it's really critical to get yourself a financial advisor. Hugely important, because if you are going to be looking to the future, you need to know, what's my budget? What do I need to live off of a month? Where is that money coming from? Is it coming from spousal support in part? And it might, depending on your particular situation, maybe you're older, getting divorced, and maybe you've fully given up a career your entire life for the family, or maybe you're younger and maybe you have an opportunity to go back to school and re-educate. What kind of money am I going to need every month to, live the lifestyle that I want to live and save for my future, and also, support my children if you have any at that time. So financial literacy, super important. Definitely see a financial advisor. And definitely, I would think, and this is maybe a question for you too, because I see that you probably have this situation, people who don't know how to deal with their mortgage when you no longer have the family home. It's being divided, it's being sold probably, and then you are now each having to have your own place. How do you qualify for a mortgage if you've been at home for 15 years looking after the kids and no credit history of your own?
Yes. And this is an important thing that we should talk about for all women and men that are at home with the kids, because sometimes it's either or. I've had clients that have been both, which is you should always have your own credit. You should have at least 2 pieces of credit at all times. And you should also have your own bank accounts. Mm-hmm. And that's not just in the case of divorce. It's also in the case of death. If your partner passes away and all those accounts disappear or get frozen the minute that person passes away, then you're all of a sudden in a really tough situation, because now your mortgage is not getting paid because it's in their name. There's no backup. So that's something that you should have regardless. And then you can't go get a mortgage because you have no credit and no employment history. So it's something that everybody should have. And everybody's like, a lot of people will say, well, that's not going to happen to me. But you can't, accidents happen, illness happens, divorce happens. So that's something that just there should be a base financial base there in terms of credit and bank accounts. And having those, if your partner is giving you a certain amount on a monthly basis, run it through those accounts. Pay your own bills with them, whether it be having a small credit card for incidentals like your shoe budget or whatever, or maybe it's kids' expenses or whatever, to keep that credit active. Use your own cards for that. And it just adds that layer of protection in the event that something should happen. So yes, I agree. And then also when it comes to mortgages, it's just harder to qualify if I think people have sometimes a skewed perspective of what they can qualify, especially in British Columbia, when we've got higher property values. It's like, well, I have a house worth $2 million and we had $1 million mortgage on it, so I'm going to buy them out of the house. So I need a $1.5 million mortgage, and not realizing that both of you were there to qualify for that mortgage. And now that the financial is different, that doesn't mean that you get to keep the house. So there's a lot of things that go into helping with those decisions. So talking to a financial advisor / talking to a mortgage professional before you are signing any papers to understand what housing look like, what do your investments look like, what does your future retirement look like. Those are all the things that your circle of people will help with. What daily practices do you recommend to your clients to help them keep grounded during their divorce?
I would say doing that sort of forward thinking piece, right? About who am I after this divorce? Who is and I hate to be sort of cliche, but who is my authentic self, right? So a lot of times I think people, even if it's not a bad marriage, but you're getting divorced, you lose yourself in that marriage. And now that you're leaving it, or that relationship, it's giving you space to find that person or reconnect with the things that you used to love and do. So, for example, I am a singer now, but I used to be a singer. Then I got married and I completely stopped. And so when I separated from that marriage, I picked up my guitar again and started playing piano again and started singing again. And it eventually led me to be the thing that I'm doing and enjoying and loving today. So I would encourage people to do those things and think, even if it's just to think about them and imagine themselves in that space, in that place, doing those things that they really feel that they want to become or be, right?
Yes, I agree. Speaking to that, like when you're in your marriage and you're in that relationship, your thoughts, your behaviors, your patterns, they're all wired into being part of that unit and what that unit looks like. And now we have to rewire our patterns and thoughts. But if we don't know who we want to be or where we want to go, that makes it harder because now we're using our old thoughts, old patterns, behaviors without that person there. And we can kind of get in a rut or in a maybe not progress further if we don't start focusing on that future self and the things that we want to do. And like, what are the things that you had that you didn't have that you wanted to have? What are some of the things that left you misaligned? So what instead of this, what do you want instead?
It could be anything too, right? It could be crocheting, it could be tennis, it could be seeing your friends more. Maybe you didn't get a chance to do that as much as you'd like to. It could be anything. It could be reading more. Maybe you just really enjoyed reading. Those are the small things, right? But
or even finding time for fitness because you didn't have time because you were solely at home with the kids and didn't have time to do those things, or finding time to travel on your spare time and explore the world. Have fun.
Yeah, exactly. And interesting, I'm gonna slightly sidebar and pick up on something you said. When people have those moments of, it's almost grief when you feel like you're losing your children because they're now going back and forth between two houses and you were so used to having them there all the time. I really try to coach people into, you need to embrace the moments that they're not there, to pick that time up, to be able to do things for yourself, purely for yourself. And, yes, it hurts to not have them there and you miss them dearly, but this is an opportunity now for you to take time for you, to do something for yourself.
We as a society condition, I'm going to say women, to believe that if their kids aren't with them, that we should feel guilt and shame and be sitting and crying in our beds because they're not there. But the better thing for our children is to do those things to fill our cup so that when those kids come back, that they can see that we are thriving and not just surviving. And your kids will thrive if you are thriving. And if we're not doing that, then they start to feel guilty. Mom's not doing well. Dad's not doing well because I'm not there. And then they feel responsible for our happiness. And we have to take responsibility for our happiness.
It would be so awful. Just to think about a child having to deal with doom and gloom mom or dad who's just depressed and sad all the time, right? That would be very, very stressful for any child to have to take that on and to have to come back to that every week or every couple of days. So absolutely, it's super important that you do something for yourself and, and as you say, thrive, right? Find ways to thrive.
It is a process. It's not something that happens overnight. I thought I was happy, but then I found another level of happiness and then I found other things and then I found extreme stress. And so it's not saying that, it's all, tulips and roses. It's definitely hard to find that groove, but if you are working towards that, then there is a level of success that can be achieved. And that self-happiness creates self-worth, creates that vision of creating your future self and finding, there's life after divorce.
Mm-hmm. There is.
Look at your band.
Yeah.
Look at the things you created, the happiness that comes afterwards. Sometimes
absolutely.
a lot of people that are happier in their second life than they are in that first one. So
sometimes it takes you to have to do something to realize what you don't want. I always like to think that it's better to focus on things you do want, but sometimes you got to step in the doo-doo a little bit to realize you like clean shoes.
Yeah, that's true. What's one myth you would like to debunk about divorce?
Oh, let me think about this. One of the myths is that because your kids are living 50-50, that child support is 50-50. And that is not the case. And that is something that a person really needs to make sure they discuss with their lawyer. So I think that that's sometimes becomes a fear, especially for people who don't have a lot of money when they're contemplating getting separated. They are thinking about money and they're very concerned about how am I going to survive? And they're thinking, well, if the kids are living with both of us, and then no child support is due because they're living with me half time, that's a myth. And definitely people need to realize that that's a myth. And it's based off of your income, not off of the living
custody
situation
arrangement.
Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah. And that is a significant myth that is out there.
I've also seen higher income women who are like, I'm paying for everything and the kids are 50-50, therefore I don't have to pay any support. And it's like, actually, you need to talk to a lawyer because I'm pretty sure that you do have to pay support.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, he's making enough to live. And it's an income equalization thing that the kids have the same circumstances in both houses.
Yes.
And child support is the right of the child, not the right of the parent.
Yes.
And that's the other thing.
Exactly.
So just to wrap it up, what would you say the most rewarding part is about your work?
I think when I see people connect the dots when I'm explaining procedure and process to them, or when I'm able to answer, a question to them, and I can tell they understand. That's what's really rewarding to me because I know they're not left in a state of confusion. And that's my biggest goal, is to demystify the process and procedure for people so they really can see the roadmap in front of them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for being here today, Jill. I really enjoyed our conversation. When we had our first conversation around divorce and being a divorce coach, I was really blown away by the level of your knowledge, and I appreciate you being here to share it
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today on the Divorce Circle podcast. Together, we're rewriting the story of divorce, from endings to empowered new beginnings. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode.